Games provide a fascinating means to learn about people. One of our family favorites is Catan, a strategy game that awards victory points to players as they explore their world, claim territory, establish settlements, and grow those settlements into cities. The game offers plenty of opportunity to sharpen one's skills at negotiation and strategy. It's also good practice in patience and damage control, since each player's turn begins with a roll of the dice. Those dice rolls bring in random elements that leave even the best players frustrated as they see their hard work wiped away. That random element is a reasonable simulation of life's uncertainties, and seasoned players approach the game with that in mind. But that's what I try to do. My success comes from knowing the rules, knowing my opponents, and knowing my own strengths and weaknesses. I don't have to start in the strongest position to win. All I need to do is play my opponents against one another and keep them from combining against me. There's very little need to be aggressive against any opponent. In fact, it's advantageous to cooperate with them at times. That brings some benefits on the game board, but more importantly, it cultivates a sense of security in my opponents, giving them the impression that I'm not a threat. All the while, I conceal my true intentions and quietly build my empire until I'm ready to end the game with a sudden and unexpected victory over those who have played right into my hands. That sounds despicable, doesn't it? I'm very good at this game, which is why those who recognize my skill find ways to cooperate and defeat me. As long as I'm the greater threat, they drop hostility toward one another, developing a trust that endures until they reach their shared goal of keeping me from victory. Then, assuming the game is still going on, they will resume their opposition to one another, dividing and conquering among themselves until someone finally wins. As terrible as this sounds, it's an accurate depiction of life. We are so easily divided, even from those with whom we share much in common and who should be our strongest allies. We don't need a devil to make us do evil. We are already prone to it because of our desire to serve our own wants rather than help others achieve their needs. All the devil needs to do is plant a suggestion that keeps us aloof from the other person, perhaps through a perceived insult, or an assumption that the other will never understand or appreciate our point of view. If they're not going to believe us or be nice to us, why bother getting to know them? Better to remain protected in our armored isolation than risk getting blindsided by a debilitating injury from a supposed friend. This is how I think Balaam operated. True, he had some insight into the world of spirits that I don't understand, but I think his understanding of human nature was much more profitable to him than his communication with the unseen world or his perceived ability to manipulate the spirits. He was much better at manipulating people. That's how he shaped circumstances to his liking. We don't think of that as witchcraft, but it's probably closer to the truth than makes us comfortable. We would rather think of witches, sorcerers, magicians, and such folk as people who use dark powers to cast spells and conjure evil spirits to do their bidding. We seldom think of witchcraft as the manipulation of an opponent, a child, a parent, or a friend into doing our bidding, either by deception or by guilt or by any other means that changes our present reality. That's different from loving our neighbors as ourselves and respecting their boundaries as our Creator intended. Maybe that's why he tells us that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. It's bad enough when we try to manipulate one another, but it's worse when we try to manipulate God. I think that's what Balaam was trying to do. We meet him when Balak, king of Moab, hires him to use his powers against the people of Israel because Balak was afraid they would invade and conquer his country. As he said, Come now, curse this people for me, because they are too strong for me. Perhaps I may be able to defeat them and drive them away from the country. I know that whoever you bless will be blessed, and whoever you curse will be accursed." Balak and his people were terrified of Israel, but they didn't have to be. Moab was a nation descended from Abraham's family, although not through Isaac, the son of promise. That's why God commanded Israel not to take any land from Moab. But Balak didn't know that, or didn't believe it. All he saw were enemies on his border. That's why he took counsel of his fear and hired Balaam to do something God said he would do. That at least is what I understand from Balak's word that Balaam was able to bless and curse anyone he pleased. In contrast, I remember the promise Abraham received from the Almighty, that he would bless those who blessed Abraham and curse those who cursed him. Balaam apparently didn't bother to correct Balak's understanding. We infer from his story that his motive was wealth and power. He asked God what to do, and God said, "Don't go to Moab." But when Balak offered greater compensation, he manipulated God's answer in a way that he could accept the offer, presumably without a twinge of guilt. In truth, it was God letting him do what he had already determined to do, just like he does with us. In other words, he allowed Balaam to hang himself with his own rope, although with the Almighty keeping watch, so that the false prophet never got a chance to threaten his divine promise to Abraham. That's how Balaam ended up blessing Israel and pronouncing doom over Moab. It could have ended there, but Balaam wasn't done trying to squeeze some kind of return out of the situation. He is the one who realized that Israel was under divine protection and that the only way to defeat them would be to find a way for that protection to be withdrawn. That's why he counseled Balak to send Moabite women to entice the Hebrews into sexual immorality and worship of their false gods, perhaps in the interest of cultural exchange. There was no need to fight the Hebrews. Under the right conditions, they would fight and defeat themselves. Not only did they make themselves abominable in the eyes of their Redeemer, they divided against themselves and weakened the nation. It's been many thousands of years since Balaam weaved his manipulative sorceries against Israel, but have we really changed? Not really. We're still the invincible seed of Abraham, whether we are native-born like the Jewish people or adopted through our faith in Israel's Messiah. How else do we account for the fact that the Jewish people are still here and thriving, and that the church in its many forms has shaped the history of nations? Yet we are not what we should be. The kingdom of heaven is still not fully manifested on earth, and the visible presence of our Messiah King is still a hoped-for eventuality. We are just as divided against ourselves as the Corinthian church was when Paul berated them for splitting into factions instead of walking out their unity in Messiah. Could it be that we are the Balaams and Balaks of this generation, counting as enemies those who should be friends, and dividing families to build up our own reputations and perceived power? Maybe we should think once more on what our God advised us to do. He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God?